They didn't whisper it. There was no shame in their voices, no hesitation. They said it the way people say something that has already been decided. She's broken. The word fell into the room and stayed there, heavy and final. Not sick enough to die, not strong enough to matter. That was how they explained her existence. Not as a daughter, not as a woman, but as a problem that had lasted too long. She stood near the door while they spoke about her, her hands folded tightly in front of her, as if holding herself together required effort. She did not interrupt. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than defense. "She won't last the winter," someone muttered. Another voice answered, colder, more practical. "That's not our concern anymore." They talked about the marriage the same way they talked about broken tools, how quickly it could be handled, how little it would cost, how convenient it would be to be done with it. No celebration was planned, no blessings were offered. There would be no dress worth remembering, no music, no gathering of family. Just a signature, just an agreement, just a deal made to move a burden somewhere else. She was told she would be married in 3 days. No one asked if she wanted it. They only told her where to stand, when to leave, and what little she was allowed to carry. The man who agreed to take her lived far away, in the mountains, beyond the roads most people bothered to travel. He was quiet, they said, kept to himself, didn't complain. "He won't expect much," someone added, almost kindly. "She won't disappoint him." On the morning she left, the air was sharp with cold. The first snow of winter had fallen during the night, covering the ground in a thin, fragile layer of white. It made everything look clean, forgiving. She stepped outside with a small bundle in her arms and stopped for a moment, just long enough to look back. No one stood in the doorway. No one watched her go. The snow crunched softly beneath her feet as she walked toward the waiting wagon. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the cold, but because she understood something with painful clarity. She was not being sent to begin a new life. She was being sent away to disappear. As the village faded behind her, the road climbed steadily upward, winding into the mountains where the air grew thinner and the silence deeper. The man waiting for her there did not know her name yet. He did not know her face. He had not agreed because he wanted a wife. He had not agreed because he believed in love. He agreed because someone had to take responsibility for what no one else would. And so, in the first snow of winter, a bride no one wanted walked toward a life no one expected her to survive.
They had called her broken for so long that the word no longer surprised her. She had learned to carry it the way others carried names, quietly, without argument. She was not always weak. There had been a time when she could walk for hours without resting, when her hands did not tremble, when laughter came easily. But illness had arrived early in her life, not fierce enough to kill her, only patient enough to take things away little by little. Strength went first, then endurance, then confidence. By the time she recovered enough to stand on her own again, the world had already decided who she was. She's fragile, they said. She's slow. She's more trouble than she's worth. No one noticed how carefully she worked to hide her exhaustion. No one cared how often she pushed through pain just to avoid being a burden. When chores were divided, she received the smallest ones. When food was scarce, she was the first to eat less. When mistakes were made, they always seemed to be hers. Not because she made more mistakes, but because she was easier to blame. She learned to apologize before anyone accused her. Learned to step aside before being pushed. Learned that survival depended on being unnoticed. The sickness left her body eventually, but the label never did. Broken, they called her, long after she could stand in the cold without falling, long after she could work through the day if she paced herself. Broken became an excuse. An excuse not to invest in her. An excuse not to wait for her. An excuse to give up. So when the idea of marriage came, it was not spoken of with hope. It was spoken of with relief. "There's a man in the mountains," someone said. "He keeps to himself. He doesn't need much." Another voice followed, practical and final. "She won't last long anyway." The decision was made without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. No one raised their voice. No one argued. They simply agreed that this was the most sensible way to be done with her. When she was told, she nodded. Not because she was willing, but because she had learned that refusal only delayed the inevitable. That night, she packed the few things she owned. A spare shirt, a pair of worn gloves, a small piece of cloth she had mended too many times to count. She did not pack memories. There was nothing there she wished to carry forward. As the wagon climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew colder, sharper. Her breath came out in thin white clouds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. She pulled her coat tighter, fighting the familiar ache in her joints. This winter, she knew, would not be kind. The man she was being sent to had not written her a letter, had not sent a message, had not asked a single question. She imagined him as the others had described, quiet, distant, uninterested, a man who would tolerate her presence the way one tolerates bad weather. Strangely, that thought did not frighten her. Expectations were dangerous. Indifference was something she knew how to survive. When the wagon finally stopped, the sun was already sinking behind the peaks. Snow clung to the trees, heavy and unmoving. The cabin ahead looked small against the vastness of the mountains, dark and unwelcoming. The driver did not help her down. She stepped onto the frozen ground carefully, her legs stiff from the long ride. The door opened. The man who stood there did not smile, but he did not frown either. He looked at her the way one looks at something that has arrived unexpectedly but must be dealt with. "You can come in," he said. That was all. No greeting, no curiosity. Inside, the cabin was simple, clean but worn. A fire burned low in the hearth. She stood just inside the doorway, unsure where to put herself. He set her small bundle down without comment. "There's space by the fire," he said. "If you need rest, take it." She waited for more. It did not come. That night, as the wind pressed against the walls and the cold crept deeper into the mountains, she lay wrapped in a borrowed blanket, staring into the fading firelight. For the first time since the word broken had been placed upon her, no one asked her to prove she was useful. No one watched her for failure. The silence was not kind, but it was not cruel either. And for now, that was enough to survive the night.
The man did not ask her name that first night. He did not ask where she came from, what she had lost, or why the village had sent her away so quickly. Questions carried weight, and he had learned to live without them. He moved through the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone long accustomed to being alone. He added wood to the fire without looking at her, checked the latch on the door, then poured water into a kettle and set it aside. "You can sleep there," he said, nodding toward a spot near the hearth. "It's warmer." She nodded and lowered herself carefully, mindful of the ache in her legs. The floor was hard, but the warmth reached her bones slowly, like something being returned after a long absence. He took the chair by the table and sat down, his back to her, eyes fixed on the flame. That was how the night passed. No awkwardness, no suspicion, no kindness either. Just two people sharing a space because circumstance demanded it. In the morning, he was already awake. She realized this not by sound, but by the smell of food. Something simple, boiled grain, lightly salted, enough to quiet hunger, nothing more. He placed a bowl on the table and stepped away. She hesitated, waiting for permission that did not come. "You should eat," he said, without turning around. "Winter doesn't forgive empty stomachs." That was the closest thing to concern she had heard in years. As the days passed, she learned his habits. He rose before the sun, worked until the light failed, spoke only when words were necessary. He did not linger, did not complain, did not invite conversation. He treated her the same way he treated the cabin, the tools, the land, with respect but without attachment. At first, she stayed near the fire, uncertain where she belonged. Then one morning she stood and reached for the broom. Her hands shook slightly as she swept, not from weakness alone, but from fear. Fear that she would be corrected,
fear that she would be told she was doing it wrong. He said nothing. The next day she folded the blankets. The day after that she mended a tear in one of his gloves. Each small act felt like a question. Each unanswered correction felt like an answer. He did not praise her. He did not discourage her. He simply accepted what was done. This confused her more than cruelty ever had. In places she had lived before, worth was measured loudly, by speed, by strength, by how much one could endure without complaint. Here, nothing was measured at all. One evening, as snow fell steadily outside, she noticed him pause at the door longer than usual. His shoulders sagged slightly before he straightened again, as if reminding himself to keep moving. "You don't need to work tomorrow," she said before she could stop herself. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet room. He turned, surprised. "Why not?" "The storm," she replied. "It will worsen by morning." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You may be right." He took off his coat and hung it by the fire. It was a small moment, but it stayed with her. He listened. Days bled into weeks. Winter settled fully into the mountains, pressing against the cabin with relentless patience. Snow deepened, paths vanished, the world shrank to what could be reached on foot. She learned to pace herself, to rest when her body demanded it rather than pushing until collapse. No one accused her of laziness when she did. The man noticed the way she worked, slowly, carefully, never wasting effort. He noticed how she warmed the cabin before he returned, how she set aside the driest wood for the coldest nights. He noticed because he had learned to survive by noticing things others overlooked. Still, he expected nothing. Not gratitude, not improvement, not transformation. Expectation, he knew, was the quickest way to disappointment. At night, when the fire burned low, he sometimes caught himself listening to her breathing from across the room. Not because he worried she would leave, but because part of him still counted who remained. Loss had taught him that. He had learned long ago not to imagine futures, not to plan beyond what could be held in one day. So he did not think of her as a wife. He thought of her as someone who had arrived, and for now had not left. That was enough. One evening she placed a cup of warm water beside him without a word. He looked down at it, then up at her. "Thank you." The word felt unused, almost foreign. She nodded, her eyes lowering instinctively, waiting for the moment to pass. It did. Silence returned. But it was different now. Not empty. Shared. And somewhere beneath the weight of winter, beneath the long-held belief that nothing good lasted, something quiet began to take shape. Not hope. Not yet. Just the fragile understanding that survival did not always have to hurt.
Winter did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way truth often does, through colder mornings, through snow that no longer melted by noon, through the way the mountains stopped forgiving mistakes. The man adjusted without comment. He stacked more wood. He checked the roof twice. He set traps farther from the cabin, knowing animals would move differently once the snow grew deep. She watched him do these things and learned, not because he taught her, but because he never stopped her from watching. At first, her work was almost invisible. She cleared ash from the hearth before it piled too high. She kept water from freezing by placing it closer to the fire. She folded cloth and refolded it until the chill eased from her fingers. These were not the kinds of tasks people praised. They were the kinds of tasks people only noticed when they were not done. The man noticed. He noticed because the cabin stayed warmer longer, because the fire caught faster, because he no longer woke to cold seeping into his bones before dawn. Still, he said nothing. Snow thickened. The world outside the cabin narrowed to white and gray. Paths disappeared under drifts. The wind howled through the trees like something alive, testing doors, probing weaknesses. On days when the man returned late, she kept the fire burning low but steady, not bright enough to waste wood, not weak enough to fail. She learned to listen for his steps, not with anxiety, but with awareness. When he came in soaked from melting snow, she did not rush to him. She simply placed dry cloth near the fire and stepped aside. He understood the gesture without explanation. One night, as the storm worsened, the man slipped on ice near the edge of the clearing. He caught himself before falling, but the jolt traveled through his leg sharply. He did not mention it, but the next morning she noticed the way he favored one side when he walked. She adjusted without asking. She moved the table closer to the fire.
She prepared food that required less standing. She kept water within reach. When he realized what she had done, he paused. "You didn't have to," he said. She met his eyes briefly, then looked away. "I know." That was all. The days grew shorter. Darkness arrived early and stayed late, wrapping the cabin in long, unbroken nights. It was during those nights that the small things mattered most. She patched his coat by firelight, her fingers aching as she guided the needle carefully through thick fabric. She mended the tear slowly, not because she lacked skill, but because rushing would waste energy she could not afford to lose. When her hands trembled, she waited. When pain flared, she rested. No one scolded her for stopping. That alone changed everything. The man began leaving his tools where she could reach them. Not intentionally, not at first, but gradually, without thought, as if her presence had become part of the rhythm of the cabin. She noticed. She did not comment. One afternoon, she noticed frost creeping along the inside wall where the wind slipped through a gap in the wood. She packed it with cloth and mud before the cold worsened. That night, the cabin held warmer longer than it had in weeks. The man noticed the difference when he woke. He ran his hand along the wall, then glanced at her. "Good," he said. It was not praise, but it was recognition. Winter pressed harder. Snowstorms came one after another, each stealing a little more from the land. Traps yielded less. The man's work grew heavier. Then one morning, he did not rise. She noticed immediately. His breathing was shallow. His skin was too warm. His eyes unfocused. Fever. She felt fear rise in her chest. Not the sharp, panicked kind, but the slow, steady fear that came with responsibility. There was no one to call for help, no road to follow. The mountains did not care. She moved without waiting for instruction. She kept the fire alive through the night, feeding it carefully, refusing to let it burn out or rage too high. She cooled his skin with snowmelt, just enough to ease the heat without shocking him. She spoke softly, even when he did not respond, not because she expected him to hear, but because silence felt wrong now. The night stretched endlessly. Her joints screamed, her eyes burned. Still she stayed. When dawn finally came, pale and uncertain, his fever broke. He slept deeply then, the kind of sleep that comes only after the body has finished fighting. She sat beside him, too exhausted to move. By the time he woke, the fire was still burning. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "How long?" he asked hoarsely. "All night," she replied. He tried to sit up and failed. She steadied him without hesitation. For a moment, his hand rested against her arm. Neither of them moved away. When he finally slept again, the world outside the cabin remained buried in snow. But something inside had shifted. When winter began to loosen its grip, slowly, reluctantly, the man found himself looking for her presence without realizing it. The fire burned differently when she tended it. The cabin felt emptier when she rested. One morning, as sunlight finally broke through the clouds and reflected blindingly off the snow, he said something he had not planned to say. "You didn't have to stay." She looked at him, confused. "I know." He nodded, as if that answer confirmed something important. They did not speak of it again, but the truth remained. She had stayed when leaving would have been easier. And Winter, the long, merciless judge, had noticed.
Winter did not leave quietly. It lingered, as if unwilling to admit defeat, sending one final storm down from the peaks. Snow fell thick and heavy through the night, pressing against the cabin until even the wind seemed exhausted by it. By morning, the man knew something was wrong. The pain in his leg had returned, sharper than before, joined now by a dull pressure in his chest. He tried to stand and failed, the world tilting abruptly. She was at his side before he hit the floor. "Don't move," she said, steady but calm. He did not argue. He had learned, slowly, to trust her judgment. The storm had cut them off completely. Traps were buried. The path to the village had vanished under deep drifts. Even if help existed, it could not reach them now. For 3 days, the man drifted in and out of fever. For 3 days, she did not leave his side. She rationed food with careful precision, saving enough for strength without wasting a single grain. She melted snow for water, warming it slowly so it would not shock his body. She spoke to him when his breathing grew uneven, grounding him with the sound of her voice. On the second night, his breathing worsened. She sat upright beside him, counting each rise and fall of his chest, refusing to sleep. Her joints burned, her head throbbed, the old weakness clawed at her, demanding rest. She ignored it, because there was no one else. By the time the storm passed, she was barely standing. But he lived. When the fever finally broke, the silence that followed felt almost unreal. The wind calmed, snow settled, the mountains exhaled. The man woke to find her asleep in the chair beside him, her head resting against the wall, her hands raw and red from days of work.
He did not wake her. He watched her instead. And in that quiet moment, something settled in him with absolute clarity. She was not fragile. She was not broken. She was steady. When she finally woke, startled and apologetic, he stopped her. "You saved my life," he said simply. She shook her head. "I did what needed to be done." That answer stayed with him. When the path to the village finally reopened, he made a decision he had not planned. He went down the mountain. The village had not changed. The same houses, the same faces, the same quiet assumptions. They looked surprised to see him alive, more surprised to see her walking beside him. Whispers followed them through the street. "That's her, the broken one. I didn't think she'd last the winter." He stopped in the center of the square. People gathered slowly, drawn by curiosity more than concern. Someone spoke first, careless and familiar. "So," the man said, "she's still alive." The mountain man turned to him. "She is," he replied, "because she kept me alive." Laughter rippled uncertainly. "Come now," another voice said. "She was barely useful here." The mountain man's gaze hardened. "You sent her away because she was inconvenient," he said. "You called her broken because it was easier than waiting." The murmurs grew louder. "She kept a fire alive for 3 nights straight," he continued. "She rationed food when I could not stand. She stayed awake when leaving would have saved our strength." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "She outworked the storm you were afraid of," he said. "And she did it quietly." Silence fell. Faces lowered. For the first time, the village saw her not as she had arrived. Thin, tired, uncertain. But as she stood now, still small, still quiet, but unbroken. Someone cleared their throat. "We didn't know," a woman said weakly. The mountain man looked at her. "You chose not to." He turned away then, taking her with him. The test had been passed, not by strength, not by endurance, but by the small, unseen choices made when no one was watching. And the village, for the first time, was forced to look at what it had thrown away.
They did not speak much on the walk back up the mountain. The path was familiar now, carved into the snow by weeks of use. The wind had softened. The light felt different, less harsh, less demanding. Behind them, the village returned to its routines, quieter than before. For a long time, she believed the test was over. She was wrong. It happened that evening, as the fire settled into a steady glow and the last of the day's cold seeped into the cabin walls. The man sat at the table, turning a cup slowly in his hands, his eyes unfocused. She waited. Waiting had become a skill. "I didn't bring you here to prove anything," he said at last. She looked up, uncertain. "I know." He nodded, as if her answer mattered. "They called you broken," he continued. "I believed them, at least enough not to question it." She felt the old ache rise, dull but present. "That was my mistake," he said. She did not respond. Words had never been her defense. He set the cup down. "When I agreed to the marriage," he said, "I expected nothing. Not work, not gratitude, not change." He paused. "I thought indifference was kindness." The fire cracked softly. "But winter has a way of telling the truth," he said. "It strips things down, shows what holds." She remembered the long nights, the counting of breaths. The fire kept alive by care rather than strength. He met her eyes. "You stayed," he said, "when leaving would have been easier." She shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know how to leave," she said. He shook his head. "You knew," he replied. "You chose not to." The word settled between them. Chose. No one had ever used it for her before. "I don't need a wife who looks strong," he said. "I don't need someone the village approves of." She waited for the condition. It did not come. "I need someone who does the small things when no one is watching," he said. "Someone who keeps the fire alive without being asked."
Her hands tightened in her lap. "And if you choose to stay," he finished carefully, "it will not be because you were sent. It will be because you want to." The room felt suddenly too quiet. She searched his face for expectation, for demand. There was none. Only an opening. "I don't know how to be what people expect," she said finally. He nodded. "Neither do I." They sat with that truth, letting it exist without rushing past it. Outside, the snow began to soften, melting just enough to release the smell of earth beneath it. Winter was loosening its hold. "I won't ask you tonight," he said. "Or tomorrow." She looked at him. "You should think," he added, "about what you want, not what you can endure." That word, endure, had shaped her life. She nodded. That night she slept lightly, her thoughts circling unfamiliar ground. Want had never been part of the calculation before. Survival, yes. Endurance, always. But want. In the morning she woke early and stepped outside. The sun caught a mountain ridge in pale gold. Snow dripped steadily from branches, each drop marking time. She thought of the village, of the word broken, of the way winter had tested her, and found something else. When she returned to the cabin, he was at the table. "I'll stay," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically. He looked up, searching her face. "Because I choose to," she added. He nodded once. That was enough. There were no vows, no declarations. Just two people acknowledging a truth Winter had already spoken. Later that day, as they worked side by side, something shifted in the way the cabin held them. Not warmer, not brighter, steadier. She moved without fear of correction. He worked without guarding his expectations. In the quiet rhythm of shared labor, the truth settled fully into place. She had not been chosen because she survived the winter. She had been chosen because of how she lived within it. And for the first time, the word broken no longer followed her into the silence.
Spring did not arrive suddenly. It came the way healing often does, quietly, without announcement, noticed only after it had already begun. Snow receded from the edges of the clearing, revealing dark earth beneath. The air softened. The mornings no longer cut into the lungs. Birds returned one by one, tentative at first, then certain. The cabin remained the same, small, plain, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But inside it, something had settled into place. They did not change their routines. They did not speak of the choice again. There was no need. She continued tending the fire, though it was needed less now. She cleaned and mended and prepared meals without the careful fear that once guided her hands. When her body asked for rest, she listened. No one measured her worth by how much she endured. The man worked as he always had, steady and quiet. But he found himself pausing more often, at the doorway, by the table, near the window, listening to sounds he had not realized he missed. The soft scrape of a chair, the gentle clink of a cup set down, breathing that was not his own. These things did not demand attention. That was why they mattered. One afternoon, as sunlight filled the cabin and warmed the walls, she stood at the window longer than usual. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond, no longer threatening, simply present. "I never thought I'd feel like this," she said. He looked up from his work. "Like what?" "Unafraid," she replied. The word surprised him as much as it did him. He nodded slowly. "That's how you know it's real." They shared meals in silence that no longer needed explaining. Sometimes they spoke of practical things, weather, repairs, the coming season. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Both felt complete. The village did not return to their thoughts often. When it did, it was with distance rather than pain. The man passed through once to trade supplies. People looked at them differently now, not with apology, not with understanding, but with uncertainty. The woman they had discarded did not ask to be seen, and that unsettled them more than accusation ever could. She did not linger. The mountain path welcomed her back with familiarity. At the cabin, she set down the supplies and smiled faintly. "I like it better here," she said. He agreed. As the season turned fully, new work replaced the old. Repairs became improvements. Survival gave way to preparation. The land, once something to endure, became something to tend. One evening, she planted seeds near the edge of the clearing. Her movements were slow but deliberate, each placed carefully. "Do you think they'll grow?" she asked. "They will," he said. "You're patient with them." She considered this. "I learned that when I had no choice." "Now you do," he replied. She smiled.
That night they sat outside as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors too gentle to name. The fire crackled softly beside them, no longer a necessity, just a comfort. She rested her hands in her lap, no longer bracing for pain. "I used to think being chosen meant being wanted," she said quietly, "by everyone." He shook his head. "No," he said, "being chosen means being seen." She leaned back, letting that truth settle fully. She had been seen. Not for her weakness, not for her endurance, but for the quiet strength that remained when everything else was stripped away. The night grew cool. He placed a blanket over her shoulders without comment. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. She simply accepted it. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not as a warning, but as a reminder that the world continued beyond their small circle of light, and for the first time she felt no need to shrink from it. The cabin stood steady against the dark. Inside it lived two people who had learned the same lesson in different ways, that worth is not proven by survival alone, that strength does not announce itself, that being chosen, truly chosen, is less about who claims you, and more about who makes room for you to be whole. The fire burned low. The mountains kept their silence, and in that quiet, unremarkable place, healing had found a home.